Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Marilynne Robinson is, as everyone here tonight surely knows, one of our finest novelists and essayists. I'd be tempted to say she is the finest novelist and essayist of our time, but that would conflict with the quality of humaneness that pervades all of Professor Robinson's work, a quality she defines in an essay as, quote, the desire to mitigate competition and put aside self-interest. In other hands, the materials of her novels might seem unpromising. Her 4 novels are set primarily in the 1950s, which for those of you who missed them or are too young to remember, came after World War II and before the excitement and upheaval of the 1960s. Her novels are deeply Christian in ways that might seem likely to alienate the millions of readers in America and around the world who are not Christian. And they grapple honestly and unflinchingly with issues that many Christians would prefer to talk about as little as possible, such as predestination and the problem of evil. Yet each of her 4 novels, Housekeeping in 1980, and then her 3 Gilead novels, and she has hinted recently that there could be a 4th at some point, Gilead, Home, and now Lila, is almost universally loved. They deal with universal themes like solitude, fear, honor, and shame, themes that many other novelists shy away from in an era that prizes irony, emotional detachment, and cynicism. Many of us have found that a single, precisely observed detail in a Marilynne Robinson novel brings an entire lost world back to life for us. A friend of mine treasures a description in Gilead of Robert Boughton's relationship with his wayward son, Jack. Jack's father favored Jack more than any of his brothers and sisters, favored him, Robinson writes, like a wound. For me, a brief reference in Lila to pictures that had been cut out of magazines, framed, and hung on the walls as decoration, conjures up scenes from my own faraway childhood, as does a description in Gilead of, quote, a bubble floating past the window, fat and wobbly and ripening toward that dragonfly blue they turn just before they burst. In her essays, Professor Robinson repeatedly upends conventional wisdom. You may think, as many people do, John Calvin was a severe, humorless theologian who helped launch the Protestant Reformation. Robinson's Calvin, by contrast, was a humane man who wrote beautifully and truly and had a remarkably high view of women. You may think that Jonathan Edwards was an 18th century American theologian who wrote a fiery sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. For Robinson, he is the author of, quote, a gorgeous footnote about moonlight. When Bill Moyers described her as a contrarian in a recent interview, Professor Robinson insisted she isn't a contrarian at all. It's just that everyone else is a contrarian. Professor Robinson frequently points out that, quote, the human brain is the most complex object known to exist in the universe. I don't know about my brain, but I have no trouble believing Professor Robinson's brain is indeed one of the most complex and remarkable objects in our universe. She's won a Pulitzer Prize for Gilead, National Book Critics Circle Awards for Gilead, and more recently, Lila, and many other awards. Tonight, she will be talking about beauty, and in particular, the relationship between Christianity and beauty. There is no better person in the world to explore these issues with than Marilynne Robinson. the author of 4 of the most beautiful novels of the past century, and one of the most profound thinkers of our time. It is a great privilege to turn the microphone over to her for her initial remarks on the theme of Our Elegant Universe is Beauty and Accident.
Thank you for a very gracious introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here in Chicago, the megalopolis that dominates our imagination in Iowa. My remarks, I think, are a little cosmic at this point, and will have to be brought down to earth by subsequent questioning. I'm very interested in contemporary science, to the extent that I can understand it, contemporary physics and cosmology and so on. I think we live in a period of some of the most beautiful thought that human beings have arrived at or undertaken in human history. I think that a lot of what we know now considerably outshines anything that Galileo accomplished, you know? I think it's a heartbreaking thing, actually, that religion, the great, brilliant tradition of religious thought, should feel itself cornered or thrown into question by this other system of beautiful understanding. I don't want to, when people talk about the pre-Copernican, pre-Galilean cosmology, the problem that came out of the problem with Thomistic theology actually was that it took what was the best science of that time and for centuries before. It invested it with an authority that allowed theology to be basically modeled on a cosmology that was basically scientific in its approach to the world, the Ptolemaic system, So I think that the point has to be taken that we have to use great caution in putting these two great thought systems side by side. But if theology is about the creation, then theology has to acknowledge the other thing we know about creation, the very beautiful, very elegant character of the reality that science increasingly makes available to our understanding, or at least to our amazement. So here we go. I have come to the conclusion that reality in its nature precludes nothing, that its operations might be taken to reflect God's freedom on one hand and his courtesy on the other. Freedom to act outside the notion of possibility we abstract from the lawfulness of the world he gives us to inhabit, and courtesy that makes the world in fact lawful, allowing us to be capable within the limits of given reality, to build and plan, to see our intentions through to their effects, to pass through the strange, rich stages of mortal life. God's freedom is expressed in what is usually called miracle, but I think the world of human experience itself should be thought of as miraculous as well. Root and branch, more miraculous in nothing than in the lawfulness that differentiates it so sharply from the seeming antinomianism of deeper reality. The dazzlements of the subatomic notwithstanding, nor the torrential expansion of space-time, the world of our experience feels knowable, stable, and predictable, and it usually is. In saying this, I wish to establish, first of all, that divine freedom pre-exists and infinitely exceeds the reality we know, and that our reality is an act of divine restraint, a covenant made with earthly life that puts self-imposed limits on a power that would otherwise overwhelm us, would effectively annihilate us. This little garden, Earth, implies an act of creation which was radically, for us, incomprehensibly free. It implies an act and an intention that are expressed in the world of our experience designedly or arbitrarily. It would be given certain features and qualities to the exclusion of an infinity of others that, if they had been chosen, would have had a part in it. Its given qualities are therefore no basis for reconstructing the creative act itself, however expressive they might be of the intent behind it. In other words, what seems to us possible and reasonable on the basis of our experience cannot be understood as conditioning or limiting reality beyond the structure of our experience. This fact is as true and important for a physicist as it ought to be for a theologian. The physicist would, of course, put aside any thought of intent, any teleology, but the theist need not and must not. And as much as I respect science and its methods, here the theologian can claim a great advantage, conceptually speaking. She need not struggle to breathe life into a purely materialist cosmos. She need not attempt a grand unifying theory out of the heterogeneous parts of non-reality. She need not leave unaddressed the fact of the extraordinary role of human consciousness in the cosmos, of which physics is one great instance. On the other hand, she is free to absorb into her account of reality elements that are anomalous, not to be arrived at by positivist reasoning. So imperious is the materialist approach to reality that it considers whatever it cannot capture by its methods as effectively non-existent. For example, the human self, the human mind. It marginalizes to the point of disappearance things we generally consider abstractions, for example, justice, wisdom, and beauty. The theologian may and must grant these even in a special reality. Some part of a definition of beauty ought to be some part. Am I audible? Are things working okay? Thank you. Thank you again. Some part of a definition of beauty ought to be that it is an aspect of experience that can, possibly should, compel attention and also reward it. To say this is to grant it an objective of existence of some kind, a place in the economy of needs and rewards that bond humankind to the world, that engrosses the mind in experience. Yet the idea of beauty varies from one perceiver to the next, one decade to the next, and from culture to culture. At the same time, it is so important in the shaping of human life that the sense of it may do more than any other influence to make a culture distinctive. The Parthenon, St. Basil's, the Taj Mahal variously and authoritatively epitomize the aesthetics of a singular place and period. Sometimes with a little instruction we can recognize varieties of beauty we could never otherwise approximate or even imagine. If existence were designed to engraft us into the world, to charm and engage us, what could be better suited to accomplishing this than beauty, with its inexhaustible openness to variation, with its frangible and circumstantial rules and limits, which enable invention and tantalize perception. The theologian can say that beauty eludes definition because it expresses the grace of God, like other elusive things, say time and life. It takes its nature from its purpose, its intended effect. Photons famously elude definition. I am not transgressing against reason when I say that essential aspects of reality confound our categories, or that they are mutable in relation to their perceivers. I am simply allowing my account of reality some of the breadth appropriate to its subject. Much thinking about human things has been captive for a very long time to the methods and biases of anthropology. And anthropology has been governed by the assumption of an original simplicity in all things human, complicated over time, at least among the majority of the species, until we arrive at modernity. A misunderstanding of non-Western languages was based on and has encouraged the idea of an original simplicity. It appeared to justify the notion that their speakers were themselves primitive. But no matter how serious the problems with the schema, no matter how much complexity is always discovered in supposed simplicity, this model has never really been replaced. Both language and beauty have mutability and accommodation as qualities that are essential to them. Both shape and are shaped continuously as they are realized in our reflections, choices, and creations. Like the genome, both are uncannily well suited to exist, to flourish in time. Futurity is implied in them in the fact of their constrained mutability. If the starting point for language was not an original simplicity, a business of threats and warnings perhaps, how else is language to be accounted for? What magic or miracle could have intervened to yield the very great complexity that characterizes human utterance as we know it? This is a real question. The theologian might say that language is essential to human nature and that it bears relation to the expressed intent manifest in all creation. In the beginning was the Word. This is a statement of faith, granted. Still, it is fully consistent with the great potency of language. If our interest is in the given world, the world of experience, then unserviceable theories of origins ought to be put aside in favor of attention to the things themselves, leaving accounts of beginnings to the sacred unknowable, or to the empirically unknown, and perhaps unknowable. Surely no theory should persist simply for want of a better one, when the theory clearly distorts its purported subject. Beauty is equally inaccessible to positivist accounts. It has no consistent usefulness, is the product of no fixed colors or proportions, is not reliably associated with well-being. It is indeed in the eye of the beholder, an eye that can be helped by instruction and experience, is in any case much influenced by them, and may, by its decisions, refine and extend the consensus surrounding the beautiful, at least within the limits of the culture and period. I may seem to be comparing unlike things. While forms and manifestations of language are very real and constantly present to us, beauty is ordinarily treated as an abstraction, this despite its unquestionable power in our experience. I do not say a conception of beauty, because there is an urge or a tropism that lies behind all conceptions of beauty, wildly as they differ, and it is this that interests me. I have come to doubt the usefulness of abstraction as a category, not only because of its suggestions of static unworldliness, but also because it distracts attention from the active and vital properties of these entities that so variously weave our lives into them as they preserve and transform history, culture, speculation, and belief, as well as the interior narratives of all our individual lives. Justice, another great abstraction, is defined differently in every age and culture, and is felt as a reality billions of times a day, as it is approximated or satisfied or offended, or as it is modified in light of circumstance. It has a very great practical power in any moment, though it too is subject to change, whether through increases in refinement or lapses into malice or revenge. A creation that was arbitrary in the way I suggest might include the fiat, let there be justice, and let there be beauty, each having the properties I describe intrinsically, not as proceeding from circumstance, or as having somehow evolved from material conditions with which they have no kinship. Science tells us that any number of universes are possible in theory, and that life is so adaptable it could occur in forms unimagined by us. So science and theology can agree on one great point. Our reality has properties that could have been radically unlike those we know and experience. If being is a cascade of accident, each moment determining the particulars of the next, and therefore excluding other possibilities, we are still left with the fact of the very remarkable substances and energies that are and have been so beautifully configured at every scale. Be that as it may, theology, on the other hand, asserts intention rather than accident, and in doing so it captures an essential characteristic of reality, that is, its coherency and mutability, its temporal being as both, and simultaneously pardon me, I have to do that sentence over again. Theology, on the other hand, asserts intention rather than accident, and in doing so it captures an essential characteristic of reality, that is, its coherency and mutability, its temporal being as both and simultaneously self-identical and subject to and capable of varieties of change too numerous to reckon. The biblical creation narrative allows us to say that the world was made to have the qualities of life, that is, to exist in time, to change and be changed freely within real but rarely absolute limits. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Nations and languages arose out of the growth and dispersion of population. Profound differences did not impinge upon essential identity, as science can tell us, though historically and at present the differences seem to matter most to us. There is a mighty paradox in identity. The infant and the old man are oneself. The life-changing event can only modify a particular life, which came before it and will continue after it. Yet the change is real, even profound. And beauty, intrinsic and perceived, attends on every change, transforming itself, refining itself, to engage the altered mind again. This renewed encounter with beauty is often experienced as a manifestation of grace. Beauty awaits our notice, while, as experience, it is eloquently modified by our histories and temperaments, speaking to us one by one, soul by soul. Beauty is grandly present in the architecture of the cosmos, minutely present in the structure of the atom, and yet we humans can seem capable of utter indifference to it. But I have begun to feel that our ability to do wrong is the basis of our moral nature, that our bias toward error gives meaning and urgency to our seeking after truth, that our blindnesses make the beautiful, pervasive as it is, always an object of discovery, a thing to be yearned for. Just as the norms of our experience of existence are radically untypical of the universe of being we can reasonably infer, with its entanglements and indeterminacies, its dark matter and anti-gravity, so we are singular among creatures precisely in our capacity to refine and elaborate our understanding in the awareness of its shortfall. It is this in us that has made tiny blue earth a singular, seraphic presence in the great cosmos, watching and pondering, rapt with wonder. We can feel deficiency in what we know or do. We can hear inadequacy in our most painfully considered phrases. And gracious and chimerical beauty will bless us with the certainty that there is more to be hoped for, more to be tried. The theologian can say all this implies divine intention and also continuous loving engagement. Because God has created the universe, humankind is at the center of it all. Thank you.
I wanted to start somewhere, really kind of almost changing the subject, but I think not changing the subject entirely, and that is, could you talk about a day in the life of Marilynne Robinson? So what do you do in the course of the day? And I'm also interested in, has that changed since Gilead? Before Gilead, I think people would say you were famous with a small f. Since Gilead, you've been famous with a big F. Has that changed the way you spend an ordinary day?
Not at all, really. I live, I'm a solitary creature, surrounded by many, many books, many of which I have not read, but I certainly do intend to. Margaret, my assistant, kind of leaves me to my own devices. She, comes to my house about 2 hours in a week and tells me what the outside world is asking of me, which I would not know otherwise. And all I do is I try to meet deadlines, and I cannot resist pursuing whatever my present obsession is. And I basically stay in my house. It's true. I mean, I like my life, but many people would not find it enviable. One of the things that I do is go out and walk around, simply so my circulatory system will get the information that I still have hopes, But it's a perfect life for me. I'm a monk, basically.
Lots of lessons for would-be writers on
Exactly.
how to go forward. So I'd love to talk just a little bit about the relationship between your Christian faith and your career as a novelist. And initially, my first question would be, did you become a Christian? Well, first of all, was there a moment when you, Eureka, became a Christian, a conversion moment, a moment when you embraced Christ as the way to be reconciled with God? And either way, how did that interact with your dawning awareness of yourself as a novelist? Were these things happening at the same time? Were they different times? How did that play out in your life?
I didn't have any real experience of dawning. I can't remember when I became interested in theology. It happened really early. I can't even imagine how I could have known what it was. I didn't have a conversion experience. I never. It's true as now as it would have been at any point in my life that if I said anything other than that I believed in God, anything other than I was a Christian, I would not be telling the truth. That's simply, I've always been fascinated by Scripture. From the time, really when I had little books, little children's illustrated versions of things and so on. I almost went to divinity school, but when I was of an age to go, the situation of women in ministry and so on was so unattractive that I just couldn't see my life unfolding that way. So I went to graduate school, but it was, it was not my first preference. I would much rather just sunk myself into some nice divinity school and read theology. I was always considered to be good with language. I got that information very early in my life. My older brother, was very diligent about encouraging me in that. But even at that, I wrote housekeeping as a kind of family artifact. It just has all kinds of inside jokes in it and so on. And I didn't think it would be published. I didn't, do anything to get it published. But I had a friend who had an agent, and he asked to see this thing he knew I'd been working on, and he sent it to the agent, and she accepted it. But the first thing I knew that he had done this at all was that I got a letter from an agent in New York telling me that she thought it would be very hard to place, but she was happy to represent it. It pays to open your mail. A moral I keep trying to learn. But in any case, I don't have any feeling of crossing thresholds or anything like that. There seems to have been a great uniformity of texture in my life, with only sort of enriching over time. That's strange, but it's true.
Did you ever have a moment where you thought being a Christian and writing about Christian themes would limit you or would limit your audience?
I've never worried about that. I wrote a highly autobiographical, in the sense that the terrain and the architecture and so on were things that I knew from my childhood. I wrote a novel about girls growing up in northern Idaho in 1956. people read it. And then I wrote, just to test this principle even further, I wrote a book about plutonium manufacture with much, much attention to the historical development of economic theory. And this did not ruin my career. And then I took 24 years off, I have never been a careerist in any straightforward sense. I write about what interests me. I can't bear the thought of writing anything that is not, important to how I see the world. I was surprised that Gilead had the reception that it had. It's coming out in Russia. It's been out in China for quite a while. These books have a sort of global audience that I certainly would never have anticipated. But I never thought about it one way or another, and I certainly didn't write them with the thought that they would have that kind of audience, or any of them. You just write about what's on your mind. It just comes down to that.
One more question in this vein. I got a telephone call this past summer from a friend of mine who's a prominent law professor. He's Jewish, not especially sometime practicing Jewish, and he's a huge Marilynne Robinson fan, like many thousands and thousands of people. He made a comment during our call that for me, as a Christian, your novels must mean even more. They must have even more of an impact on someone like me than someone like him. Do you have that kind of expectation for your novels? Do you imagine that they'll affect people differently?
Again, I really, it sounds sort of solipsistic, but I don't think a great deal about my readership. I'm awfully glad they're there, but one of the things that I try to teach my students at the workshop is that what you think you know about a reading public is not true. That if you write something that's conventional in terms of the things that have been published recently, you're not testing to see how broad the interest of the public might be, People scare themselves into writing about things that are not really very interesting to them and not very original even. When in fact, if they just trusted the public a little bit, they could draw on their own real resources, and have a much more satisfactory career as writers. Certainly as far as the psychological experience of producing the work is concerned.
One more question about the writing process. To kind of complete our lessons for young novelists, and the lessons seem to be try not to have a novelistic career, don't write what people are trying to get you to write, take lots of walks. I'm not sure what the full takeaway of that is, but psychologists, when they study novelists, artists, and other people in creative fields, and I think they would say this extends beyond creative fields, often talk about a quality of what they call flow, which is the sense of you're being in a zone, you're having this creative period where you feel like you're doing what you were made to do, being what it means to be fully human. Do you have that kind of sensation when you're writing, or is it more even keeled? Do you have moments where you feel like you're in the flow, and do you feel as though if you're in that kind of a flow, you have a sense of transcendence or a sense of God that's different from at other times?
The phenomenon of flow is certainly real. I mean, I don't know any writer who would say otherwise. I think of it as, when you're teaching people to write, what you have to do is get them to step over some sort of interior threshold between their conventional thinking and intelligence and the deeper intelligence of their mind, One of the most important learning experiences I had really was when I was living in France and I was working on housekeeping, and it was in the beautiful countryside and everything, and the little kids in the voisinage, for whom Americans were still exotic, would come and tap on the windows to see us, look at them, or whatever the thrill was, I don't know. But they'd be there all the time, It made it very hard to concentrate. And so I went into a little back room and closed those big shutters that actually darkened the room. And I had a little wobbly desk lamp and a spiral notebook. And I was putting together the landscape of northern Idaho, which I had not really lived in for about 17 years at that point. But there I was in this sort of sensory deprivation chamber, thinking to myself, I'm the only person in the universe in a dark room in France remembering Idaho. I was absolutely confident of that. But I did remember. I would try to think what something was like, and then it would float up in my memory, the whiskers on certain kinds of lilies, all these kinds of things. Doesn't mean that I used them, but I was amazed, really. And what you find out when you try to write and when you're in that, what they call a zone, is that your mind is much more replete with memory than you would have thought it is. You find out that you have characteristic preoccupations that you would never have known that you had. I was talking to a former student of mine last night who called because she was worried about her second novel, which she's writing. And one of the things that bothered her is that it felt to her as if things were falling into patterns that had been discoverable in her first novel, her first very successful novel. But that happens to you. You think, something has a shape of a characteristic sort of beauty for you that you would not know if you didn't work in that way, if you didn't try to access a deeper mind. You can't do much until you do that. You can't, if you're writing out of your front office mind, you're writing conventional stuff. But if you can make yourself deeply concentrate, that's where the treasure is, And then you have to respect it. The other thing I tell my students all the time, you quoted the thing about the brain, you have to be in awe of yourself. You have to say, I've got this thing, and I don't know what it can do until I test it. And I have been forgetting things, but it's been treasuring them up, It has a vocabulary that's larger than mine. Everybody, this happens to me all the time. Where did that word come from? So anyway, I'm going on and on. But my point is simply that yes, writing is an extraordinary experience of a kind of uneffortful concentration, very high degree of concentration. It's kind of like flying in a dream or something. I think that I risk the idea that I'm divinely inspired because I think that a lot of self-deception could lie in that direction, But I certainly try to write good books,
Well, there's a fair amount of evidence you've succeeded in that. In your recent essay on beauty, you note that, and this is a quote from the essay, we all know we can be conditioned to see beauty where our culture or generation tells us to see it. And you made similar remarks tonight about the way our perception of beauty seems in some respects to be culturally conditioned. But you also go on in this essay to say the point should be to discover an essential beauty, not to abandon the intuition altogether. I'm curious as to whether you believe there are universal principles of beauty. Is there a universal beauty, or is beauty inevitably and all the way down culturally conditioned?
Oh, neither.
Why am I not surprised? That's what you said.
No, my thinking about beauty has evolved since the earlier thinking about beauty. I
think that counts as not fair.
I'm sorry. I apologize. In any case, well, what I'm trying to say, a friend of mine sent me a letter. I just got the letter, and it was so strange to me because he anticipated many things that I was writing here that seemed to me as if it took me a month at least to earn, But we are in the stream of being we are in the stream of reality that, if we look at reality and the orders of it, is conditioned by something that we're very happy to call beauty. And it is in, you know, it is in process. It occurs in 1,000 forms. You know, if something beautiful is somehow destroyed for you, it loses beauty, you usually find a way to apprehend beauty in other terms. I'm not just talking about psychological adjustment, I'm talking about the fact that beauty is intrinsic in reality, but it is also in conversation with us. It is not static. It is, you know, a principle of organization that our minds are adapted to respond to because we are of one kind with the world we inhabit, which I think is a very hard thing for us to remember. You know, you can read about photons and quantum entanglement and so on, as if they were happening in some kind of cosmic zoo at some great distance, you know? But all of these things are the absolute conditions of our own reality. And so if it is meaningful to say that the universe is elegant, then there is no reason to think we do not participate in that elegance. On the part of the universe, it is not a static elegance. We know the universe is expanding at a terrifying rate and all the rest of it, you know. We know, you know, that life forms change over time and so on. We, you know, that there is this strange, simultaneously constrained and mutable force of life that runs through all reality. We're right in there. We cannot be defined with any remainder that you could set outside the reality that physics knows, you know? So what I'm saying in a certain way is that beauty is a principle of nature that accommodates transformation, you know, and that we, being of that same nature, apprehend beauty. It speaks to us. We know its language in a sense, you know, which does not make it static and does not make it externalized in the way that we imagine externalization when it can't really be possible, because we're right in the middle of being. Is that clear?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is not absolutely. The thought that comes to mind as you say that is what the Bible says about us being made in the image of God, and the idea that our minds are the creation of a rational creator, and that the universe is rationally intelligible, or at least the Bible suggests it does. Do you see those things as connecting up? I mean, is your sense of beauty and your sense of what a person is? You've commented a number of times in a number of places about every encounter with another human being as being an encounter with the sacred. Could you say something about how these things fit together, your conception of the cosmos and its structure and who we are?
Well, the idea that I'm trying to sort of elaborate here and in other essays that I've written is that I borrowed Jonathan Edwards' phrase, the arbitrary constitution of the universe. And what that means is that what we can know about reality is that it appears to reflect choices, you know? I mean, people use that sort of, you know, that argument, that anthropic argument, you know, a little bit this, a little bit of that, and we wouldn't have happened. And I don't think that that's a very useful way to look at it, because that doesn't exclude accident at all, you know. But I do think that if you look at it in another light and say, there is no way that you can start from any imaginable beginning and build toward this as a necessary system, that it frankly doesn't fit very well in the cosmos that we know. You know, what are we going to do with quantum entanglement? Make computers. Nevertheless, but you know what I mean, in the advanced physics that you read about now, it's completely mind-bending. If you start any book on quantum theory, the first thing it tells you is that nobody understands it. You know, and then you read for 350 pages and you don't understand it because the author didn't need it. But, but it is absolutely testable. It is plowed into the economy. There is no question about its usefulness. It's descriptive power. But it operates by no logic that we can find analogy for in our little Euclidean snow globe here, you know? And so I'm saying that the world was put together as it is by divine fiat, that Genesis is absolutely right about it. Let there be and there was, you know. There could have been 3 moons and 5 suns, you know. Let there be and there was. And then when human beings are created, they are created as exceptional as they are by fiat again. This is the creature that is made to be the meaning bearer for the created order. And you know, the attempt, these stories of origin really bother me because you can't ever get from the original simplicity they imply to the complexity that is really the great reality that we should be amazed by, you know, that we should exploit, I would say. You know? And it's so strange, you know, like you read about a virus, right? There are very few forms of life that are older than viruses, if there are any, if they are life. You know, a virus is a weird thing. But they're very, very literal about their self-replication. And they're incredibly good at survival, which is supposed to be something that we are all refined by, right? So you go back to the original virus, there it is. Has no features, right? No genome or whatever. And it's absolutely superb at what it does, you know? Now how can it, if you look at, I mean, like, I'm just going on about this because it interests me, but you know, my modus vivendi, but a human being has way fewer genes than a carrot. And a pine tree outshines this entirely, right? So if you look at that, the tendency is, I mean, what I would say if I had to rationalize that, is that we evolve in the direction of elegance. You know, fewer and fewer things behave more and more economically, you know. Okay, but then what about that virus? What about that oldest thing in the world that seems already to have arrived at a stunning level of elegance as far as its every measure of efficacy, you know? I just don't believe in the model of development of complexity out of simplicity. And what the alternative would be, if it isn't fiat, which is what I like, I don't know. But I don't think you should characterize the reality that we live in by having recourse to a narrative of origins that simply doesn't appear to work. And I mean, I think it's really a problem. These people, you know, these sort of Dennett, Dawkins-ish people, they actually have very, very contracted, very small notions of what human beings are, because they insist on imposing this model of an initial simplicity, you know. Isn't it wrong? I mean, if you cannot proceed from your initial assumption to a model of reality, look at the assumption again. Or at least put it in abeyance and say, here's reality. And it's fully interesting enough. We have access to it. Why entrap it in a theoretical model that is not adequately complex?
That's right. As you're saying that, by something that you've said elsewhere, which is that kind of a model, the Daniel Dennett or the Richard Dawkins kind of model, ends up forcing its adherents to assume that the things that are most central to us as human beings, or many of the most central experiences we have as human beings, our experience of beauty, our longing for justice and things of that sort, are accidents, and that they're not really important to what it means to be human. I've gone on too long, but I can't resist asking one more question before I start taking some of the questions you all have asked, and that is, about the relationship between beauty and suffering. It's actually kind of an excuse to read one of the many beautiful passages from your work, and one of the most famous passages from your first novel, Housekeeping. One of the most famous passages is a really beautiful passage about longing that starts out, imagine a Carthage sown with salt, and then goes on, and I'm picking up the quote here, well into the passage. For when does a berry break upon the tongue as sweetly as when one longs to taste it? And when is the taste refracted into so many hues and savors of brightness and earth? And when do our senses know anything so utterly as when we lack it? And here again is a foreshadowing. The world will be made whole. One of the things that strikes me about this passage that many, many reviewers and commentators have picked up on is it's a beautiful passage in the middle of a book that is not a happy book. I don't want to spoil it for those of you who haven't read Housekeeping, but it doesn't really have a happy ending, there's not lots that's happy in it. Do you feel as though suffering is necessary to our appreciation of beauty, or can you just say a word or two about the relationship, as you see it, between suffering and beauty?
Well, that's an interesting question that I haven't really, I mean, if you talk about Christianity, for example, it's so interesting. The most compelling images of it are startlingly brutal. And I think sometimes I'm going to give a sermon next Sunday. And I'm using the passage where Jesus appears to the disciples and shows them the wounds in his hands. And that's so extraordinary to me. I mean, he says a ghost doesn't have bones, touch me, feel me, And you think, I mean, there is that line in Revelation about the lamb that was slain before the beginning of the world and so on. But it is amazing to me that Jesus, coming to them, not being recognized by them, he doesn't say, don't you know my voice? Or, I know all your names. Or, don't you know my face? He says, see the wounds in my hands. With the implication, frankly, that he does carry them. And you think, I mean, I'd have to think about that for a long time before I knew quite what I thought about it, aside from the fact that it is an insistence that Jesus is, in the most eternal sense, human.
That's great, and I think you just answered the first question on the list, so I will read it and then go to the next question, unless you would like to say more about it. Marilynne not only is a wonderful writer and speaker, she also reads minds, because she's not looking at this. But the first question is, how does Jesus' death on the cross fit into your idea of beauty in this universe? And I think you've answered that question. The next question is, when you look at the world, do you ever feel evil overwhelms beauty? What enables you to keep believing in a good God?
Well, one of the things, and this again is something that comes to my mind when I think of Jesus showing his wounds. Most people who have lived on earth have lived in absolutely terrible circumstances. And when you read the Bible, I think, we really have to recruit the humility to say, this really is not about us in many very important ways. This is meant to comfort the afflicted, And I mean, we have our afflictions and they're often not minor, but over against people that dealt with what people have dealt with from antiquity, invasion, plague, famine, all that sort of thing. And at the same time, they made art. They practiced, they developed complex religion. They built beautiful cities, we have to look at people who did not live long, did not live well, and created some of the great philosophies that we still return to when we want to get our thinking in better shape. No? So I don't think we're very well positioned actually to think about suffering. We cannot accept, we can't imagine that it was such a universal aspect of human life as we thought. Even as late as Adam Smith, he writes about a woman who had 17 children, not one of which survived to adulthood. We have to believe that because humanity has been what it has been, that there is a resource of enormous passionate interest in beauty, attempt to reify it, that we're so much indebted to the fact that people who lived such frightening lives from our point of view left us a very rich heritage of beauty. I don't know what that's like. You know what I mean? That we've had many privileges, but one of the privileges that we have not had is to find out what ordinary human life has been like on this planet, But in the face of, we tend to dismiss it, but in the face of all the beautiful and all the heroic things that people have done, under the most terrible circumstances, we have to assume that beauty is something that can be recruited out of people whose lives would appear to be very dispiriting, frightening things. And this happens over and over again. You read about the siege of Stalingrad. What are they doing? Writing poetry, But the Bible, one of the reasons that I have Lila reading the Old Testament, reading Ezekiel, is because she could pick that up and see the suffering and the loss of homeland, the loss of everything, and say, oh, this is about people I know.
Can't resist, since you brought up Lila reading Ezekiel. This is one of the things I wanted to ask about, but ran out of time, but I can't resist quoting, and I'm cheating, I'm stealing from the questions, but quoting a line that Lila says in relation to the book of Ezekiel, which she's writing out to kind of help her learn how to write or relearn how to write. And Ezekiel, as many people here I'm sure know, is a pretty spectacular book with some remarkable imagery. And what Lila says towards the end of the book is, it could be that the wildest, strangest things in the Bible were the places where it touched the earth, which I just think is a really, really lovely line, and I apologize to you all for taking time from your questions to read that. So the next question, and I think we have time for a couple more questions, is the softball question. Is God beauty itself, and is the man Jesus then somehow an instantiation of beauty in 20 words or less? No, just kidding about the 20 words or less.
Well, I think that most theologians have taken the beautiful, the sky, all the rest of it, as being the signature of the divine, But I don't make God identical with anything. I don't think we should have any restrictive definitions, aside from those that he gives to himself, like faithfulness and lovingness and so on. I think that the limits that can be understood for God are simply his gratuitous relationship toward us, the fatherhood, parenthood, whatever. I think that the things that happen among us that have their analogy in God's presentation of himself toward us are beautiful. I think that any father blessing his child, any mother feeding her child, they're doing something that's divine, really. And the beautiful, I think that every culture has always seen that as beautiful. And it's beautiful because it's a likeness that God makes in the mutuality between the human and the divine.
Another very big question of this sort. Does beauty exist in the absence of human observation? If not, how is it objective? If so, how could we know? This will take you back to Locke, I think.
Well, my impulse is certainly to say yes. I do believe that the universe is relevant. I do believe that it is intrinsically a masterpiece of possibility. I don't think that it was meant to be unperceived by us, And frankly, this crazy perceiving that we do, this thing that's flying faster than anything outside this, any satellite or spacecraft has ever done, that's narrowing in on Pluto. Pluto is beginning to have colors that we can photograph. This is amazing. You look at any view of the Earth you can't get a view of it in the Milky Way because it just disappears out of its tininess, But there it is. And it's like a seraph. It is. It's all eyes and it sees it. Endless directions, and this calm, endless wonder that, makes us like the Babylonians, but with more technology, I think it was meant to be perceived, and we were meant to be perceivers. And I don't really imagine. I am very anthropocentric in the sense that I don't think there's much meaning in the thought of the universe not addressed to us. To the extent that I think of it, I imagine it's still beautiful.
So I think we have time for one more question. We don't really have time for it, but I'm going to create time for it. One last question, and with apologies to the folks who texted in questions that we're not able to get to. One last question. Why is it so troubling to consider beauty or morality as accidental or contingent, as you suggested in your remarks and just now as well?
Morality, I don't know. The 20th century has made some really frightening experiments with morality. A lot of people, the sort of right of the stronger to eliminate the weaker and so on. That's been tested. We've had a look at that. And it's very, very unbeautiful. Very, it seems like blasphemy to me. I'm not really disturbed. I'm speculating about how beauty exists. I'm trying to be sufficient to the idea that it actually redefines and replenishes itself in altered circumstances, that there's probably, have any human beings ever existed that didn't. And all the early civilizations talk about the stars, They paint animals on walls, this sort of thing. They make strings of seashells. They make knives that are so finely formed that they can't be used for anything. Which is purely art, what can I say? I just don't think that, I think that beauty is a resource that we draw on in the same way that reason, or reasonableness, is perhaps a better word, is something we draw on. That it varies from culture to culture and moment to moment, but we understand when someone is trying to deal with it. We understand that if our model of it falls short, we can refer to reason itself again to try to restore it to a better state, So I'm just trying to say that these abstractions function in the world. They're realities for us. If we depart from them, we get in terrible trouble. At the same time that they are so elusive and so chimerical in their own way that we can't simply make a restrictive definition of them. I think that part of what has been fun about civilized life is that we do continuously have new definitions of beauty. And one of the things that's heartening about it is that we can have better definitions of justice.
So one last thought as we bring the evening to a close. What would you challenge students and the other folks who are here tonight to do after the things that we've talked about, that you've said about beauty? What would your marching orders be for each of us?
Well, you know, the first thing that I would say is remember who you are. Remember that you are the flower of the universe, right? And this is not, it's not elitist or anything. Everybody in this room, everybody in any room, this is true of, right? It's an amazing and splendid thing. And you can do all kinds of things with it, and you won't know until you make the experiment. And you will not make a correct anticipation of the minds that other people will bring to what you do, you know? I mean, and that's wonderful. How could anything be more liberating than that? And the second thing I would say is read primary sources.
That seems to be a very central takeaway these days, and see where people have gone astray in their interpretation of the primary sources. Thank you so much. This has been as wonderful, I think, as we all thought it would be.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.